Welcome to Cybersecurity HQ's Daily News Report. It's November 25th, 2024, and we're your direct line to the most critical cybersecurity developments. So let's just dive right into it, huh? What's making headlines today?
Well, we've got a lot to cover, but let's kick things off with a vulnerability that's been exploited in the wild. CVE 2024-42057.
Yeah, I saw this one come across my desk. This one is impacting Zyxel firewalls, right?
That's right.
Okay. And how serious is this one? Like on a scale of, 1 to 10, where does this fall?
Oh, this one's a definite 10. It's a critical command injection vulnerability. And basically what that means is that attackers can execute commands on these firewalls without authentication.
Yikes. So even if organizations, patch their systems back in September when this was first, discovered, they could still be vulnerable.
Yeah, that's the really concerning part about this. This vulnerability actually bypasses that September patch, and it's affecting devices that are using user-based PSK authentication with usernames that are longer than 28 characters, so it's kind of a specific set of circumstances.
So even if they did everything right, they could still be in trouble.
Unfortunately, yeah. Attackers are using this vulnerability to create rogue user accounts, and that gives them access through those SSL VPN tunnels.
And this isn't just hypothetical, like people are actually getting hit with this, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sequoia, their cybersecurity firm, they reported at least 8 Helldown ransomware victims, all running those vulnerable Zyxel firewalls.
So this is a real and present danger.
Very much so.
Okay, so what can organizations do to protect themselves? Like, what are the concrete steps they can take?
Well, the most important thing is to update to the latest firmware immediately.
Okay.
If that's not possible for whatever reason, then disabling remote access, at least temporarily, that's a critical step.
Okay. So update or disable.
Right. And, this whole situation with Zyxel, it just underscores the importance of not only patching promptly, but also verifying that those patches actually address the issue.
Yeah. You can't just assume that everything's fine because you installed the patch.
Yeah.
You have to actually check.
Exactly. And especially in cases like this where, usernames exceed those recommended lengths, it's just a good reminder to double check everything.
Yeah. Patch but verify. All right, let's move on. What else is on our radar today?
So let's talk about the industrial automation sector. I think we should talk about the vulnerabilities discovered in MySCADA's MyPRO system.
Yeah, this one's got some serious implications for critical infrastructure. Like, we're talking power grids, manufacturing plants, things that really affect people's lives.
Exactly. Researcher Michael Heinzel, he uncovered a whole bunch of vulnerabilities in MyPRO, and they exposed those systems to some pretty serious threats. We're talking remote code execution, and not just any remote code execution with elevated privileges. So an attacker could basically do whatever they wanted on that system.
Oof, that's not good.
And it doesn't stop there. We've also got authentication bypass, which means attackers can just waltz right in without needing any credentials and access to sensitive files. So it's like the trifecta of vulnerabilities.
And these systems, industrial control systems, they're not always designed with security as a top priority. So patching and updating, it's not always as easy as it is with, say, a regular computer.
That's true. And that's why CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they've issued a warning about this. They're saying that full system compromise is possible.
And even though we haven't seen any attacks yet, the potential damage is huge, right? Like if attackers get control of a power grid or a water treatment plant.
The consequences could be catastrophic. We could be talking about widespread blackouts, contaminated water supplies it doesn't bear thinking about.
So what can organizations do to protect themselves? Like, is there a patch available, or what steps can they take?
Yeah, so patches for MyPRO Manager 1.3 and MyPRO Runtime 9.2.1, those were released back in September. So if you haven't patched yet, you need to do that immediately.
Okay, patch ASAP, but is that enough?
Well, there's always a catch, right? Even if you've patched, if your systems are listening on all network interfaces post-installation, you're still vulnerable. So you need to double-check your configurations. Minimize that attack surface. Don't make it easy for the attackers.
So patch and verify. It's a recurring theme.
Absolutely. You can't just assume you're safe because you've installed a patch. You got to do your due diligence.
All right, good advice. Now, we were talking about ransomware earlier with the Zyxel Firewalls. And you mentioned the Helldown ransomware group. Are they like a major player in the ransomware game, or are they kind of a smaller fish?
They're not exactly new, but they have been making headlines recently, targeting those Zyxel firewalls and all. But it's important to remember they're just one group in this much larger, constantly evolving ransomware ecosystem.
So it's kind of like a hydra, right? Cut off one head and two more grow back.
Exactly. You can disrupt one group, take down their infrastructure, but there are always others waiting to take their place.
And the barrier to entry for ransomware, it seems like it's getting lower and lower, right? Like with ransomware as a service, anyone can get in on the action.
That's right. With RAS, you don't need to be a coding whiz to launch a ransomware attack. You can just rent the tools and infrastructure you need. And then you've got double extortion, where they don't just encrypt your data, they also threaten to leak it publicly.
It's a nightmare scenario.
It is, and the numbers reflect that. IBM's 2024 report shows a 20% increase in ransomware incidents year over year.
So it's getting worse, not better. What can organizations do? Like, how do they even begin to address this?
It's not easy, but it starts with understanding the threat. Organizations need to take a multi-layered approach to defense. They need to have strong backups, incident response plans, and they need to train their employees to recognize and avoid phishing attacks.
So it's not just about technology, it's about people and processes as well.
Exactly, and it's about being prepared for the long game. Ransomware is not going away anytime soon.
Okay, good advice. Let's move on to nation-state activity. I understand that Microsoft recently released a report about North Korea and their use of fake IT workers to, well, make money and steal data.
Yeah, this report was pretty eye-opening. It shows how North Korean operatives are creating these fake profiles on job platforms using stolen identities. They're even using voice-changing software to trick recruiters during interviews.
So it's like a whole new level of sophistication in their social engineering tags.
Yeah.
And they're not just going after small companies, right?
Right. They've reportedly infiltrated companies in the US, the UK, Australia. They've even landed remote work contracts with firms in China and Russia.
So this is a global problem. And it's not just about money. They're after data, intellectual property, trade secrets.
Exactly. They want to infiltrate strategic industries, gain access to sensitive information that could give them a competitive advantage. And with the potential integration of AI video tools, deep fakes, it's going to be even harder to spot these fake profiles in the future.
So how can companies verify the authenticity of these IT professionals they hire remotely? Like, how do you even begin to vet someone when you're not meeting them face to face?
It's a real challenge, but it starts with robust background checks. Multi-factor authentication is essential, and I think we're going to see more reliance on AI-powered verification tools. Basically, we need to use technology to fight technology.
Okay, so vigilance and technology. Anything else?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this is an evolving threat. What works today might not work tomorrow, so we need to stay ahead of the curve, share information, and collaborate.
Yeah, cybersecurity is team sport. All right, let's move on to another nation-state threat, this time involving Russia.
This involves a group known as APT-28, or Fancy Bear. They're linked to Russian military intelligence, and they're known for their sophisticated cyber espionage campaigns.
I've heard of them. They were behind some pretty high-profile attacks in the past.
Yeah, they're not messing around. And in this latest case, they conducted what's being called the nearest neighbor attack.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Tell me more.
So they were trying to get into a target's network. They tried password spraying, but the target had multi-factor authentication, so that didn't work. So they had to get creative.
Creative how?
They actually compromised an organization in a neighboring building.
Wow.
They exploited the Wi-Fi adapter in that building to create a bridge to their original target's network.
So they physically hacked their way in.
Yeah.
By targeting a nearby location that had weaker security.
Exactly. It's a reminder that physical security and cybersecurity are interconnected. You can have the best cybersecurity in the world, but if someone can just walk into a neighboring building and plug into your network, you're in trouble.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not just about securing your own network. It's about being aware of your surroundings, what's next door, who has access.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that attackers are constantly looking for new ways to bypass security measures. They're creative, they're persistent, and they're not afraid to think outside the box.
So we need to be just as creative and persistent in our defense.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's lighten things up a bit. Let's talk about some good news for a change. There have been some big funding rounds in the cybersecurity industry lately, which indicates that investors are still confident in the sector.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Which companies are attracting the big bucks?
Well, one standout is Halcyon. They're an Austin-based cybersecurity firm that specializes in ransomware mitigation. They just raised $100 million in a Series C funding round. That brings their valuation to a cool $1 billion.
Wow, that's impressive. What's driving that investor confidence? Like, what makes Halcyon so special?
Their innovative approach to ransomware mitigation, they've got this platform that combines AI-driven engines with some pretty unique techniques. Like they have something called key capture,
Hmm.
and that basically aims to neutralize the impact of ransomware on devices,
Yeah.
minimizing downtime and data loss.
So it's like a safety net for organizations facing ransomware attacks.
Exactly. And in a market that's just flooded with ransomware threats, that's a very valuable proposition.
Yeah, no kidding. Any other companies making waves in the cybersecurity funding landscape?
Yeah, we should mention Visio Trust. They're based in San Francisco, and they're a third-party risk management provider. They just secured $7 million in their latest funding round, which brings their total funding to $24 million.
Third-party risk management, that's a hot topic these days, especially with all the reliance on external vendors and cloud services. What makes Visio Trust stand out?
Well, they've developed this AI-powered platform that analyzes things like SBOMs, those are software bill of materials. They analyze data breach reports, all sorts of data, and they use that to provide real-time insights to enterprises that are managing vendor risks.
So it's like a due diligence tool on steroids.
Exactly. It helps organizations understand the risks associated with their third-party vendors, and that allows them to make more informed decisions.
Makes sense. It seems like AI is playing an increasingly critical role in cybersecurity. From threat detection to risk management, it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's definitely becoming an indispensable tool for security professionals. But it's important to remember that AI is a double-edged sword. Attackers are using it too, so it's a constant arms race.
That's a good point.
Mm.
All right, let's move on to some other notable events that caught our attention. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella recently called for a culture change within the company following several high-profile security failures.
Yeah, that was a pretty big statement. And it comes after a string of setbacks for Microsoft.
Setbacks like...
Well, there was that global IT outage back in July. Remember that?
Oh yeah, that was a mess. What caused that again?
A faulty update from CrowdStrike, actually.
Oh, right!
And then there was that DHS report back in March that highlighted Microsoft's vulnerabilities, particularly against the Chinese hacker group, Storm 0588. And let's not forget about the compromise by the Russian hacking group, Midnight Blizzard.
So they've been hit from all sides. And by some pretty sophisticated adversaries.
Exactly. And Nadella is acknowledging that Microsoft needs to do better. He's saying that security needs to be baked into the culture of the company, not just an afterthought.
It's good that he's acknowledging the problem. But the question is, will words translate into action? Like, what concrete steps are they taking to address these systemic security issues?
That remains to be seen. Talking about culture change is one thing, but implementing it at a company the size of Microsoft, that's a whole other challenge. They need to prioritize security at every level, from product development to employee training, and they need to be more transparent about their security practices.
So a lot of work to do, but at least they're aware of the problem and talking about it.
Yeah, that's a start. All right, let's shift gears again. What's been happening in the fight against cybercrime? Any good news on that front?
I'm hoping for some wins. It feels like we've been on the defensive for too long.
Well, there have been some significant crackdowns lately, which is encouraging. Two operations in particular stand out: Operation Kronos and Operation Endgame.
Okay, tell me about those. What were they targeting?
Operation Kronos was led by the UK's National Crime Agency, and they targeted the Lockbit ransomware gang. They were able to disrupt Lockbit's infrastructure, including their dark web leak site.
That's a big win. Lockbit has been a major pain for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, they've been behind some high-profile attacks, so taking them down, even temporarily, is a significant victory.
And what about Operation Endgame?
Operation Endgame had a broader focus. They were targeting the malware infrastructure that underpins a whole bunch of ransomware groups. They wanted to disrupt the tools and networks that these groups rely on.
So it's like cutting off the supply chain for ransomware.
Exactly. And they had some impressive results. They disrupted over 100 infected servers, seized thousands of domains, and basically crippled the botnet networks that these ransomware groups were using.
That's a big deal. It's not just about going after individual attackers anymore. It's about disrupting the ecosystem that enables them.
Exactly. And I think we're going to see more of this kind of approach in the future. Law enforcement agencies are realizing that they need to be more proactive and target the infrastructure that enables cybercrime.
It's good to see some progress on that front. Now, shifting gears again, what's new with CISA? I understand they've been busy as well.
Yeah, they recently launched a new cybersecurity training platform called CISA Learning.
What's the purpose of this new platform? Who's it for?
It's designed to enhance cybersecurity training for a whole bunch of people. Federal employees, veterans, and other stakeholders, they're replacing those old, outdated training systems with cutting-edge courses, cloud security, ethical hacking, the use of AI in cybersecurity. You name it, they've got it covered.
Investing in workforce development is crucial for strengthening cybersecurity.
It is. We need more skilled cybersecurity professionals, and this new platform from CISA is a great step in that direction.
All right, good to know. What else is on our agenda?
Let's talk about critical infrastructure for a moment. There's been some interesting news out of the UK.
Okay, what's happening across the pond?
The UK's Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, or NDA, they just unveiled this state-of-the-art nuclear cybersecurity facility.
Wow, that sounds serious. What's the purpose of this facility?
It's called the Group Cyberspace Collaboration Center, or GCCC for short, and it's located in Cumbria. The goal is to bolster cybersecurity within the UK's nuclear sector, which faces, some pretty unique and potentially catastrophic risks.
Yeah, nuclear facilities are high-value targets for cyber attacks. So it makes sense that they're investing in specialized security measures. What will they be doing at this new facility?
They'll be focusing on enhancing system resilience, facilitating joint training exercises, and leveraging advanced technologies. Things like AI, robotics, all that good stuff, to protect those critical operations from cyber attacks.
So it's a dedicated effort to safeguard critical infrastructure.
Exactly. And it's a recognition that cybersecurity requires specialized facilities and collaborative approaches. You can't just do this in isolation.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, let's circle back to the ransomware landscape. We talked earlier about how it's a persistent threat, despite all of the efforts to combat it. Are there any specific trends in the ransomware world that you're seeing that you think are particularly concerning?
Yeah, one trend that we're seeing is that ransomware groups are getting much more sophisticated in their targeting strategies. They're not just randomly spraying malware anymore. They're doing their research, they're choosing their victims carefully.
They're like profiling their victims, doing their due diligence.
Exactly. They're identifying organizations that are likely to be vulnerable and organizations that have a high tolerance for downtime, meaning they're more likely to pay the ransom.
That's scary. So it's even more important for organizations to be proactive in their security posture.
Absolutely. They need to assess their vulnerabilities, patch their systems, implement strong backups, have incident response plans in place.
It's a lot to keep track of, but the stakes are high.
They are. A ransomware attack can cripple an organization.
All right, good advice. Let's move on to some smaller but still noteworthy news items. What else do we have on our list?
Well, CISA recently added a new vulnerability to their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog.
Okay, what is it?
It's a critical Microsoft SharePoint vulnerability, CVE-2024-42057.
And what does that allow attackers to do?
It allows them to execute arbitrary code remotely, so pretty serious stuff.
And it's actively being exploited.
That's why it's on the KEV catalog, which means that organizations need to patch this immediately.
Okay, patch, patch, patch. It seems like that's the message of the day.
It pretty much is.
All right, what else?
Let's talk about the cost of cyber attacks. I saw a report recently that put a dollar figure on just how much these attacks are costing businesses.
Oh yeah, what report was that?
It was a report by Helldown, and they found that cyber attacks have cost British businesses a staggering $55 billion in lost revenue over the past 5 years.
Wow, that's a huge number.
It is, and it includes all sorts of attacks, ransomware, data breaches, phishing scams, denial of service attacks, you name it, it's costing businesses money.
So a major economic impact.
Absolutely. And the report highlighted a pretty worrying statistic. Only 61% of businesses in the UK are using antivirus software.
Seriously? That's shocking. In this day and age, you'd think that basic cybersecurity hygiene would be given.
You'd think so. But clearly, there's still a lot of work to do in terms of educating businesses about the importance of cybersecurity.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of bad news today. Let's end on a more positive note. Are there any companies out there that are really doing well in the cybersecurity space?
Yeah, definitely. One company that comes to mind is Sentinel.
What do they do?
They're known for their AI-driven endpoint protection and cloud security solutions, and they're carving out a pretty significant niche in the market. Their total addressable market is over $100 billion.
Wow, that's a big market.
It is, and their financials are looking really healthy. Their Q1 FY25 revenue was $186.4 million. That's a 40% increase year over year. And their annual recurring revenue, or ARR, hit $762 million.
Okay, so they're making money. But what's the secret to their success?
Well, they've got a great platform, their Singularity platform. It offers robust AI-powered solutions, and they've been very strategic in expanding into cloud security. They've also partnered with companies like Lenovo to broaden their reach.
So they're making smart moves, and they're capitalizing on the growth of the cloud security market. How do they compare to the big players like CrowdStrike?
Well, Sentinel is differentiating themselves through their AI capabilities, their competitive pricing, and their flexible deals. And they've actually benefited from some of CrowdStrike's recent missteps.
Missteps like?
Well, remember that IT outage that CrowdStrike had back in July?
Oh, yeah, right, the one that caused all those problems for Microsoft.
Exactly. That outage actually helped Sentinel gain some market share. And their financial trajectory is looking pretty promising. They achieved profitability earlier than expected, and their Q1 FY25 free cash flow margin hit 18% alongside break-even non-GAAP EPS.
So they're a company to watch. All right, what else is on our list?
Well, Google has been relatively quiet on the cybersecurity front lately, but they did recently unveil a new tool that's designed to simplify account access for third-party apps.
Oh, yeah. What's that all about?
It's called Restore Credentials, and it's supposed to make it easier for users to access their app accounts after they migrate to a new Android device.
That sounds useful. People switch phones all the time, and it's always a pain to have to log back into all your apps. How does this new tool work?
It's built into Android's Credential Manager API, and the process is automatic, so apps can sign users back in without any additional interaction. It relies on a restore key, which is basically a FIDO2 compliant public key. That key can be stored locally on the device in encrypted format, or it can be backed up to the cloud.
So even if you lose your phone, you can still access your app accounts.
Exactly. It's a good example of how user experience and security can go hand in hand.
Yeah, I like that. Security doesn't have to be a pain. All right, let's move on. What else is happening out there?
Let's talk about supply chain attacks. There's been a case recently involving a compromised Python library.
Oh no, not another one.
Yeah, it seems like these supply chain attacks are becoming more and more common.
So which library was compromised this time?
It's called IGEPA, and it was quarantined by the Python Package Index, or PyPI, after it was discovered to be malicious.
What was it designed to do?
It was designed to steal crypto keys. It was masquerading as a CryptoPay API client, and it had been downloaded over 12,000 times since its release in September.
So it was a pretty successful attack, at least in terms of distribution. How did it work? Like, how did it steal the crypto keys?
The malicious code was hidden in version 0.1.13 of the library, and it was obfuscated to make it harder to detect. But basically, it would steal the CryptoPay API tokens and send them to the attackers via Telegram bots.
So a classic supply chain attack. Attackers infiltrated a legitimate library and used it to distribute malware.
Exactly, and it highlights the importance of code scrutiny. We can't just blindly trust open source repositories. Developers need to be vigilant and scrutinize source code before they use it in their projects.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we need to be careful about what we're downloading and using, even from trusted sources.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's shift gears again. Let's talk about malware evasion techniques. Like, what are the latest tricks that attackers are using to bypass security measures?
Well, we're seeing increased sophistication in both phishing and malware attacks. Attackers are always coming up with new ways to bypass traditional detection tools.
Can you give us some specific examples?
Sure. On the phishing front, we're seeing attackers using one-time IP access to deceive researchers. They're creating these randomized folder structures to evade tracking, and they're deploying dynamic phishing kits that can adapt in real time to bypass detection.
So they're making it harder and harder to track and block phishing campaigns.
They are. And on the malware side, they're using things like crypting services to bypass antivirus detection. They're generating device-specific profiles to circumvent ID verifications. And they're using Telegram bots for secure command and control communications.
So they're combining technical expertise with social engineering tactics to maximize their chances of success.
Exactly.
It's a multifaceted threat that requires a comprehensive defense strategy.
Couldn't agree more. All right, let's move on to cloud security. Are there any specific concerns or vulnerabilities that we should be aware of?
Yeah, one area that's a bit concerning is the growing use of infrastructure as code, or IAC, and policy as code, or PAC-key, tools?
And those are so IAC tools, they allow you to manage your cloud infrastructure using code. And PAC tools allow you to manage your security policies using code. And they're generally considered to be more secure than traditional methods. But they're not immune to attack.
So what are the risks?
Well, researchers have uncovered some pretty novel attack techniques that target IAC and PAC tools, like HashiCorp's Terraform and Open Policy Agent, or OPA. For example, with OPA, attackers can exploit built-in functions like HTTP.send to exfiltrate credentials.
Okay, so they're finding ways to abuse legitimate functionality.
Exactly. And even when those functions are restricted, attackers can use techniques like DNS tunneling to covertly extract data. And with Terraform, attackers can introduce rogue external data sources or modules to execute malicious changes.
So these tools, which are supposed to enhance security, can actually become attack vectors if they're not properly secured.
Exactly. It's crucial to implement robust security controls around these tools. Things like role-based access control, the principle of least privilege, and rigorous logging practices. And there are IAC scanning tools out there like Tarascan and Checkov that can help identify vulnerabilities early on.
So it's a reminder that any tool, no matter how secure it is in theory, can be compromised if it's not implemented and managed properly.
Absolutely.
All right, we were talking earlier about BYOVD attacks, bring your own vulnerable driver attacks. Have there been any new developments on that front?
Yeah, researchers have discovered another BYOVD campaign that's leveraging an outdated Avast anti-rootkit driver to disable security protection.
So it's the same concept as before. They're exploiting a legitimate driver to gain unauthorized access. What makes this campaign different?
The researchers at Trellix, they identified a hard-coded list of 142 security processes that this malware targets. It's a very methodical and targeted approach to crippling security defenses.
So they're not just randomly disabling processes. They're going after specific security tools. What can organizations do to protect themselves from this type of attack?
Implementing driver block lists is a good start. That'll prevent known vulnerable drivers from being loaded, and you need to actively monitor for any unauthorized driver activity. If you see a new driver being installed or an existing driver acting weird, that could be a sign of a BYOVD attack.
So vigilance and monitoring. Got it. Now, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about the human element in cybersecurity. We've seen some pretty crazy stories lately about individuals who are, well, let's just say, not using their cybersecurity skills for good.
Yeah, there have been some pretty wild cases, like that guy from Kansas City who was indicted for hacking into organizations to market his cybersecurity expertise.
Wait, what? He hacked companies to offer them his services?
Yeah, you heard that right. He would breach networks, manipulate security systems, and then he would contact the victims and offer to fix the problems he had just created. It was his way of drumming up business.
Wow, that's a bold strategy. I guess you could say he took the show don't tell principle to a whole new level.
He did, and it backfired spectacularly. He's now facing up to 15 years in prison if he's convicted.
Yeah, that'll teach him. But it's a good reminder that not all cybersecurity professionals are ethical. And organizations need to be careful about who they trust.
Absolutely. Do your due diligence, vet your vendors carefully, and don't just trust someone because they have a fancy website or a lot of certifications.
Good advice. All right, what else is on our agenda?
Well, we've talked about a lot of vulnerabilities today. Let's talk about a specific company that's been having a rough time lately. QNAP.
QNAP, the network attached storage provider.
That's the one. They've been hit with a bunch of vulnerabilities this year, and they've been scrambling to release patches.
So what's the latest with QNAP? What vulnerabilities are they dealing with?
Well, they recently released patches for multiple vulnerabilities in their NAS and Core Router products. One of the most serious ones is CVE-2024-42057. It's an authentication flaw in NoteStation 3, and it allows attackers to execute unauthorized system functions.
It's not good.
It's not. It's rated as a 9.3 on the CVSS scale, which means it's critical. They also patched an OS command injection vulnerability in Core Router 2.4.x. That one has a CVSS score of 9.5.
So they're dealing with some pretty serious stuff. What's their advice to users?
Update, update, update. They're urging users to update their systems immediately, and they've provided detailed instructions on their security bulletin. So if you're using QNAP products, go check that out.
All right, good advice. What else?
Let's talk about Windows 11. There's been some trouble with the latest update, 24H2.
Oh, yeah. I saw some headlines about that. What's the issue?
It seems to be causing problems with certain USB scanners, specifically the ones that use the Extended Scanner Control Language Protocol, or ESCL for short.
Okay. And what's the problem? Are they just not working at all?
Well, after installing the 24H2 update, these scanners are having trouble switching from ESCL mode to USB mode, which basically makes them unusable.
So it's a driver compatibility issue.
Exactly.
And what's Microsoft doing about it?
They've acknowledged the issue, and they've placed a compatibility hold on the update for the affected devices.
So if you have one of these scanners, you won't be offered the 24H2 update until they figure out a fix.
Right. And they're advising users not to manually update either, just wait for the official fix.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
Better safe than sorry, especially when it comes to operating system updates.
Absolutely.
Anything else about the 24H2 update? Any other issues we should be aware of?
Well, there have been some reports from gamers who are having problems after installing the update.
Oh no, what kind of problems?
They're experiencing crashes, freezes, audio glitches, all sorts of fun stuff.
And which games are affected?
It seems to be mainly Ubisoft games, Assassin's Creed, Star Wars Outlaws, those kinds of titles.
Has Microsoft said anything about this?
They have. They're aware of the problem, and they've actually implemented a block to prevent the update on devices that they know are affected.
That's good. At least they're taking steps to prevent more people from having problems.
Yeah. And Ubisoft has also released some temporary hotfixes for some of their games.
So hopefully things will get sorted out soon. It's always a bit of a gamble with these major operating system updates.
It is. You never know what's going to break.
Okay, let's move on. What else is on our list?
We were talking earlier about DYOVD attacks, bring your own vulnerable driver.
Right.
Well, there's been another campaign discovered, and guess what? They're leveraging that SAM outdated Avast anti-rootkit driver.
So they're reusing the same exploit.
Yep. It's still effective, unfortunately.
They're using it to disable security protections, right?
Exactly. They exploit the driver's kernel-level access to terminate security processes. So it's basically like turning off the alarm system.
Not good. What makes this particular campaign stand out? Like, is there anything new or different about it?
Well, the researchers at Trellix, they dug into the malware and they found a hard-coded list of 142 security processes that it targets.
Wow. That's very specific.
It is. It shows that they're being very methodical in their approach. They're not just randomly disabling processes, they're targeting specific security tools, trying to neutralize them.
So what can organizations do to protect themselves?
Implementing driver block lists is a good first step. Prevent those known vulnerable drivers from being loaded. And you need to be monitoring for any kind of unauthorized driver activity.
Okay, so block and monitor. Got it.
Right. And, it's a reminder that those legacy software vulnerabilities, they can come back to haunt you. Even outdated drivers can be weaponized.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can't just forget about old software. You got to keep everything up to date. All right, let's shift gears a bit. We're heading into the holiday shopping season, and that means...
Phishing attacks galore.
Exactly. What are the scammers up to this year?
Well, one of the latest scams involves fake emails claiming that your Apple ID has been suspended.
Oh yeah, I've seen those before. They can be pretty convincing, especially if you're not paying close attention.
Right. And that's what they're counting on. People are busy, they're distracted, they're not thinking straight. They just want to get their holiday shopping done.
And the attackers are taking advantage of that.
They are. They're using that sense of urgency to trick people into clicking on malicious links or giving up their credentials.
So what can people do to protect themselves?
Be skeptical. Don't click on links or open attachments in unsolicited emails, especially if they're creating a sense of urgency. Always verify the sender's email address. Hover over the link before you click it to see where it's really going.
Good advice. Anything else we should be on the lookout for?
Well, just remember that legitimate companies like Apple, they're never going to ask for your password or your security codes via email.
Right. If you get an email that's asking for that kind of information, it's a scam. Delete it.
Exactly.
All right, before we move on, any other breaking news or critical vulnerabilities we should cover?
Yeah, there's one more vulnerability that I think is worth mentioning. This one affects 7-zip.
7-zip, like the file compression tool.
That's the one. It's a pretty popular tool, and it has a vulnerability that could allow attackers to execute malicious code on user systems.
Yeesh, that's not good. What's the vulnerability?
It's CVE-2024-42057, and it's a problem with the way 7-zip handles data within the Z standard decompression feature.
So just opening a malicious archive file could compromise your system.
That's the risk, and it's especially worrisome for users of Linux-based file systems, like BTRFs and OpenZFS. They're more susceptible to this vulnerability.
Okay, so what's the fix?
Update to the latest version of 7-zip, version 24.07. That version addresses this vulnerability. So if you're using 7-zip, go update it right now.
All right, update your 7-zip. Got it. Now, have there been any big data breaches or hacks lately that we should be aware of?
Well, there's been a rather embarrassing data breach involving Andrew Tate.
Andrew Tate, the internet
This
personality.
is the one.
Okay, what happened?
His online education platform, The Real World, it got hacked.
The Real World. What is that? Like some kind of self-help thing?
Yeah, it's a subscription-based platform. He used to call it Hustlers University,
Right,
but he rebranded it to The Real World.
right. And what did the hackers get?
They got a lot of sensitive user data, almost 800,000 usernames and 324,000 email addresses.
Ouch, that's a lot of data.
Uh-huh.
How did they manage to breach the platform?
Well, it seems like the platform had some pretty serious security flaws. The hackers were able to manipulate servers, delete attachments, flood chats with spam.
So it wasn't a sophisticated attack, more like a case of negligence?
Pretty much, the platform's security measures were just inadequate, which is not a good look for Andrew Tate, considering he's already under house arrest in Romania facing criminal charges.
Yeah, this data breach is not going to help his case.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even controversial figures can be victims of cyber attacks. All right, is there anything else we should know about this Andrew Tate hack?
Yeah, the hackers who claimed responsibility, they identify as hacktivists.
Hacktivists. So they weren't motivated by financial gain.
Right. Hacktivists, they're driven by political or social ideologies. They target organizations or individuals they perceive as unethical or harmful.
So they're like digital vigilantes, using their hacking skills for social or political activism.
Yeah, you could say that. And it's an interesting wrinkle in the cybersecurity landscape. Not all attacks are about money. Sometimes it's about ideology or a sense of justice or revenge.
That's a good point. Cybersecurity is intertwined with all sorts of social, political, and ethical issues. All right, let's wrap up with our final news item for today. This one involves some hefty fines that were imposed on some insurance companies for data leaks.
Yeah, New York regulators recently fined Geico and Travelers Insurance over $11 million for a data breach that happened back in 2020.
Wow, $11 million. That's a big fine. What happened?
Well, it seems that hackers exploited vulnerabilities in their systems to file fraudulent unemployment claims during the COVID-19 pandemic.
So they took advantage of the chaos and uncertainty of the pandemic to target these companies.
Exactly. It was a time when a lot of organizations were scrambling to adapt to remote work and all the other challenges of the pandemic, and security may have slipped through the cracks.
Makes sense. So what kind of data did the hackers get access to?
They accessed over 120,000 driver's license numbers.
Ouch, that's a lot of sensitive information. And it seems like the regulators didn't take this breach lightly.
They did not. They found that Geico failed to adequately secure their API endpoints, and Travelers neglected to implement multi-factor authentication for their independent agent system.
So a combination of technical vulnerabilities and lax security practices led to this breach.
Right. And now both companies are required to implement comprehensive cybersecurity programs and conduct regular audits to make sure this doesn't happen again.
It's a costly lesson, but hopefully it will serve as a wake-up call for other organizations to take cybersecurity more seriously.
Absolutely. Data breaches have real-world consequences, both in terms of reputation and financial penalties. Organizations need to prioritize cybersecurity to avoid similar outcomes.
It's not just an IT issue anymore. It's a business imperative.
Yeah.
It's a legal obligation. And ultimately, it's a societal responsibility.
Well said. Cybersecurity affects all of us.
All right, before we move on, is there anything else you'd like to highlight about these insurance company fines?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that the regulators specifically called out the lack of multi-factor authentication as a contributing factor to the breach. MFA, that's that extra layer of security where you have to provide multiple forms of identification to log in. It's a basic security measure, but it's incredibly effective, and yet so many organizations still don't have it implemented properly.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah.
MFA is like Cybersecurity 101.
It is, and it can make a huge difference in preventing unauthorized access.
Hopefully these fines will serve as a wake-up call for other organizations to take MFA more seriously.
Let's hope so.
All right, we've talked a lot about technology and vulnerabilities and attacks today.
Yeah.
But I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about something that's often overlooked. Cybersecurity awareness.
Cybersecurity awareness is crucial. It's not just about having the right technology and processes in place. It's about educating users about the threats they face and empowering them to make smart decisions.
So it's about creating a culture of cybersecurity within organizations where everyone is responsible for security.
Exactly. Everyone, from the CEO to the intern, needs to understand the risks, and they need to know what their role is in mitigating those risks. and what to do if they encounter a security incident.
So what are some effective ways to improve cybersecurity awareness among employees?
Regular security awareness training is essential.
Yeah.
And it can't just be those boring click-through modules. You need to make it engaging and relevant. Simulate phishing attacks, have interactive quizzes, things like that.
Make it fun.
Exactly. And make it personal. People are more likely to remember something if it relates to their own lives.
Good point. All right, before we wrap up, are there any emerging threats or trends that you think our listeners should be aware of as we head into 2025?
One area to keep an eye on is social engineering attacks. They're becoming increasingly sophisticated. Attackers are getting better at crafting convincing phishing emails, impersonating trusted individuals, and exploiting human emotions to trick people into making mistakes.
So it's more important than ever to be skeptical, verify information carefully, and never give up sensitive information unless you're absolutely sure you're dealing with a legitimate source.
Absolutely. Trust, but verify. That's the golden rule of cybersecurity.
Well said. All right, let's end on a more positive note. What are some of the positive developments in the cybersecurity industry that you're excited about?
One company that I'm really impressed with is Recorded Future.
What do they do?
They use machine learning to analyze threat data and predict future cyber attacks. They're like the cybersecurity Nostradamus.
That's pretty cool. So they're helping organizations stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. They recently published a really comprehensive report on the evolving tactics of ransomware groups. They're highlighting the growing use of extortion and the increasing targeting of critical infrastructure. And they're actively collaborating with law enforcement agencies to disrupt cybercriminal operations.
So they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk.
They are. They're making a real difference in the fight against cybercrime.
All right, one last thing before we wrap up. Google recently announced a new feature for Android called Privacy Sandbox. What's that all about?
Yeah, Google is bringing the Privacy Sandbox to Android. They're trying to improve user privacy and limit the sharing of personal data with third-party apps.
So it's kind of like what they're doing on the web with Chrome.
Exactly. It's a set of new APIs and technologies that are designed to give users more control over their data without sacrificing the functionality of apps.
So it's a win-win for users and developers.
That's the goal.
Can you give us some specific examples of how Privacy Sandbox will work on Android?
Sure. One of the key features is the Topics API. Instead of tracking users across different websites and apps, the Topics API allows apps to infer general interest categories based on user behavior.
So if I'm constantly browsing websites about cars, the app might infer that I'm interested in cars.
Right. And then it can serve me ads related to cars.
So it's a more privacy-preserving way of targeting ads.
Exactly. Another important feature is the Fledge API. It stands for First Locally Executed Decision Generation.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But basically, it allows ad auctions to happen on the user's device rather than on a remote server. So your personal data stays on your device and isn't shared with third-party advertisers.
Okay, so that's a big win for privacy.
It is.
So Privacy Sandbox is still in development, right?
It is. It's still early days, but it has the potential to significantly improve user privacy on Android devices.
I'm glad to hear that. All right, let's wrap up there. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the latest cybersecurity news.
My pleasure.
We'll be back next time with more insights and analysis on the ever-evolving world of cybersecurity.
Until then, stay safe out there.
Yeah, it really just goes to show that anyone can be a target. No matter how high profile or controversial they are, it's a good reminder for everyone to take cybersecurity seriously. So anything else about this Andrew Tate hack that stands out to you?
Well, the hackers themselves are pretty interesting. They identify as hacktivists.
Hacktivists, huh? So not your typical cyber criminals looking for a quick payday.
Nope, not at all. Hacktivists are motivated by, social or political causes. They tend to target organizations or individuals that they perceive as, unethical or harmful. They're trying to expose wrongdoing or just disrupt operations.
So they're like digital vigilantes using their hacking skills to make a statement.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it adds a whole other dimension to the cybersecurity landscape. It's not always about money. Sometimes it's about ideology or a sense of justice.
That's a good point. It makes you realize that cybersecurity is a lot more complex than just, firewalls and antivirus software. All right, let's wrap up with our final news item for today. This one involves some hefty fines that were imposed on a couple of insurance companies for data leaks.
Yeah, New York regulators recently fined Geico and Travelers Insurance a total of over $11 million for a data breach that happened back in 2020.
Wow, $11 million. That's a pretty big hit to the wallet. What happened?
Well, during the COVID pandemic, hackers exploited vulnerabilities in their systems to file fraudulent unemployment claims.
So they capitalized on the chaos of the pandemic when everyone was distracted and trying to figure out how to work from home.
Exactly. It was a perfect storm for cyber criminals. And unfortunately, these insurance companies weren't prepared.
What kind of data did the hackers get their hands on?
Over 120,000 driver's license numbers.
That's a lot of sensitive personal information. No wonder the regulators came down hard on them.
Yeah, the regulators weren't messing around. They found that Geico failed to properly secure their API endpoints, and travelers didn't have multi-factor authentication set up for their independent agents systems.
So a combination of technical failures and, just basic security hygiene lapses.
Right. And now both companies have to implement comprehensive cybersecurity programs. They also have to conduct regular audits to prove they're taking security seriously.
It's a costly lesson learned. But hopefully it will serve as a warning to other organizations to prioritize cybersecurity, because data breaches can have very real consequences.
Absolutely. Data breaches can damage your reputation, cost you millions of dollars in fines, and erode customer trust. It's just not worth the risk.
Couldn't agree more. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to emphasize about this case?
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight the fact that the regulators specifically called out the lack of multi-factor authentication as a contributing factor to the breach.
MFA. It's like the seatbelt of cybersecurity.
It is. It's a simple security measure, but it's incredibly effective at preventing unauthorized access. And yet, so many organizations still don't have it implemented properly. It's mind-boggling.
Well, hopefully cases like this will serve as a wake-up call. MFA should be table stakes for any organization that handles sensitive data. All right, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
A lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of attacks, a lot of bad news. But I think it's important to remember that there's also a lot of good work being done in the cybersecurity industry. There are a lot of smart, dedicated people who are working hard to make the digital world a safer place. And there are a lot of innovative companies that are developing new tools and technologies to help us stay ahead of the bad guys.
That's right. Cybersecurity is a constantly evolving field, and we have to stay vigilant and adaptable.
So stay informed, stay curious, and never stop learning.
That's the key. And don't be afraid to reach out for help if you need it. There are a lot of resources available, like Cybersecurity HQ.
Exactly. Shameless plug.
Hey, gotta get the word out.
All right, that's it for our cybersecurity news roundup for today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay secure.